Thank you, Jared, for having me here. I really enjoy the meetups, and I really enjoyed last year's conference, and I'm honored to be speaking at this one. I'm going to use a bit of an analogy, actually, from what Jared brought up about music sampling. When the analog to digital converter came out eons ago, no one realized at that point that you could use it to encode speech, images, music. And then even after they did that, people didn't realize you could use it to manipulate things in a computer, which you brought in. And what my first sampling synthesizer simply did was record sound, put it in the computer's memory, and then let it react to keyboard play. So when the musician was playing the keyboard, it would start the waveform. When the key went down, shift its pitch, and so on. Things we take for granted today, things you can implement in HTML5 on a website. Then it was a rack of equipment that I had to wire wrap and solder myself that was the size of a phone booth, but things have changed. Well, one of the things that I came across with one of my last finance jobs, really, which involved a lot of natural language processing, looking for fraud detection at a major bank, 17 different types of operational risk. Are they stealing money? Are they money laundering? Is it a cybersecurity threat? All from unstructured data, was how much people reveal about themselves when they speak or when they send any kind of written communication. It can go far beyond sentiment analysis. In fact, if you think about it, if you were to see something written by someone you knew, you would probably recognize that it was from them, from the way they use words. And if you just met someone and they're talking, you could probably make a good guess about what their interests were, what their political leanings were, what their intellect was like, from the way they put their words together. People size people up through conversation. Well, you know, psycholinguistics researchers have noted this a while ago, and there's several commercially available packages and some academic ones which can take a small sample of text, say a few thousand words, and create about 60 different meaningful trait facets from that data, saying whether you're open, whether you're conscientious, whether you're extroverted, even neurotic. You can tell if you're angry, if you're happy, if you're positive about the future, or talking more about the past and not so positive about the future. And there's different ways these algorithms work. Some are as simple as doing word counts against very large sets of words and tenses. With large data sets, they work remarkably well, even given their simplicity. And obviously can be implemented very simply with a MapReduce algorithm, so you can go through billions of texts if you want to of those techniques and get some very interesting information. You can go further. You can use concept techniques where instead of looking at simple words, you look at groups of words that are meaningful, and you can go beyond that. And you get more accuracy as you do, but just to be clear about this, even the simplest techniques with a lot of data work eeringly well. It actually still surprises me how accurate these profiles are. They compete with standardized psychological testing, which can take over a few hours for people to complete. And it can be done completely passively. And considering we're all expressing ourselves in text on the internet right now, we're all leaving who we are out there for anyone who has this technology to see. Furthermore, you can take this information and you can aggregate it into organizations. So if you want to find out, and one of the things we'll get into later, how you can use this, what a company's personality is like, you can do that. One of the things I'll get to later is looking at Amazon. There was an article in the New York Times about Amazon last August where they said it was a rough workplace and people were complaining about it. So we scraped about 6,000 employees from Amazon's posts on everything we could get from all the usual suspects, Twitter, Facebook, and so on. And then we ran it through these algorithms, and I'll be presenting that information later. But we've also been able to profile what makes people good for different types of occupations, so it could be used in hiring. There's tons of applications for this. We have to focus on a few, because they tell us if you focus on too many, the venture capital people don't like that. So we have to bring it in a bit. But there's all kinds of engineering things you could think of as well. Things that we're not doing, but are possible, would be you could make an app for your phone where it would look at your emails or even voice communications and say, hey, that call made you pretty unhappy. That person, last 10 times you talked to them has pissed you off. Or this person, you're going to be cheered up. It's a good call from them. And it can analyze your friends and yourself and how you react and how they react to you and so on. Or you could have an email application which, before you send the email, says, are you sure you really want to send that? I don't know how many of you have sent one you've regretted later, but this could catch that. And it's actually a problem in large companies. Occasionally, people get angry and they send things off which they regret later. So you can check for the tone as well. And I could go on, but I could just want to give you an idea of what's possible. And I think that you're going to be seeing lots of this data available. I know that IBM Watson is making software as a service API available, which does this analysis, which anyone can sign up for and use. There's another, the originators of this was called the LIWC. You can Google that and find it. That's something which is open sourced. And you can start playing with the data. But you need to be able to collect large amounts of data first to make it useful. So we started out and we scraped the S&P 500 companies and have millions of records of employees' posts and twits and so on. And then we can start using both supervised and unsupervised learning techniques to see what we can make of this data. And that's where it gets interesting. Let's go to the next one. So what can we do with this? An interesting story is, I won't name names, but we went to a large venture capital company because we're still looking for our Series A. And they said, this is very interesting, but we're having trouble now with one of our investments. And won't mention which one, but it was a social media analytics platform. It was based in New York. And they said, we're having some trouble with the executive and some of the people reporting to this executive. And would you, sort of point your analysis at this company for us, see what you can find out. So we did this. We found that everyone there was had very high scores, except in one area. The CEO was very low in extroversion, was very agreeable, which doesn't sound bad, but actually for someone in charge that has to tell people what to do, it can be. And but also the people felt confident with it, but they were dissatisfied at the same time, which led us to predict that they could be losing employees. So we gave this report in. They gave it actually to an executive coach that was working with the CEO because they knew they were having a problem. The executive coach said, I can't believe how accurate this is. This is the same kind of analysis we've done after all this extensive surveying and testing. 2 weeks later, 5 of their 6 executives left the company. So we think we may have a tool, a product just there for VCs that want to keep track of their investments to make sure their teams are functioning properly. Another example that I'll get into later is real estate. A lot of people go into the real estate business, people at their first job, sometimes after returning to the workforce. The real estate companies take them in, train them to be brokers. Only about 20% of them really stay. So they've got a huge loss ratio, which is expensive. So we did an analysis of what makes a good real estate broker. I'll be getting into that, just all this briefly, because I used up about half my time already. But we've developed profiles that we feel can be used to help people decide whether they should become real estate agents and help companies in hiring. Another thing, large companies do surveys all the time. I'm sure everyone here has worked at a large company, has gotten a survey saying, please complete this. It's got to be in 3 days, and it takes a few hours to fill out about your job satisfaction and so on and so forth. Well, we can do this 2 ways. We can actually do it externally without even touching any of the company's data, just by looking at the people's posts and tweets and things like that. Some companies which have people which aren't that active in the internet, though, may want to run it on their internal documents, and we can anonymously connect to their email server and go through all the emails and get the text that way. And if we do that, we can also get a lot of interesting metadata which identifies different cliques and subcultures within the company, which may actually be an SEC requirement for companies that have a lot of people's money at risk, large banks of trading and so on, to find out that they're, not doing things they shouldn't be doing and so forth. There's a lot of risk. You've seen that large companies, JP Morgan had $1 billion in fines last year. If we could identify people who are bad actors based on looking for high levels of Machiavellianism and neuropathy. I come from the hedge fund world at the time. I went, as Jared said, in the finance, and I can tell you there are some neurotic people there. A little of it's good. The other thing we can do is we can do a time series analysis. So we can look at why is this company all of a sudden getting seismic activity on all these facets? Because you sort of get a baseline. It goes all over the place, new highs, new lows, high rate of change. They could be taken over. They could be having, maybe they just found out that their drug in the pipeline was approved by the FDA before announcement. Maybe they found out it wasn't approved. Maybe there's an earnings surprise. This kind of information is interesting to hedge funds. And that would come under the area of alternative alpha. On a less sort of dramatic note, we can find that there's personality factors and traits of companies which can cause them to outperform on a relative basis within their sector. So that could also be used for investment purposes. Now, a little bit about R. Why we love it. When you have all this data and you want to present it and you want to be able to give an app to a customer, it's very easy. You can use Shiny to produce interactive applications which go directly against the data. The things I saw earlier today about the R Markdown will make this even better. I'm very excited about that. They're just great simple data analysis tools, and we can also make some very pretty graph networks, which I'll be showing you. I'm going to pick up the pace a bit. So let's look at some of this data just from a few companies. Okay, I'm comparing Google to Yahoo here. Now, it turns out that if you look at this, one of the things that really sort of stands out is innovation. Google is at a 0.7, and Yahoo is 0. However, there's a lot more entrepreneurship activity at Yahoo, and I think that was basically different things they've been trying to do, services to start to rekindle the company. And you can see there's actually more entrepreneurial-minded people now at Yahoo than at Google. Job satisfaction is higher at Google, but people at Yahoo are showing that they're more motivated right now, perhaps because they're in a survival mode. Now, this is a recent takeover. There was a merger between Dow and DuPont. And you can see in a lot of areas, there's a lot of similarities, but there's a huge difference in characteristics that make people good salespeople that DuPont has far more than Dow. And that could be that Dow is more industrially based, more B2B, doesn't need the same type of sales, but it's just interesting to note that. And as you can imagine, there's lots of different comparisons one can make with a simple tool. And just here's one more Coca-Cola and Heinz. Okay, so let's go to Amazon. So we scraped everything we could from them. And this is what we found. We found data which is a little different from what the New York Times showed. We showed that they're actually very high on openness, that they're high on conscientiousness, about average and extroversion. We did notice that they're pretty disagreeable. They got a 38% score there. But as you know, engineers like to argue with each other, and to some people that could be seen as a bad trait, but if you're from the hard sciences and engineering and coding development, a good argument is appreciated. and there's a bit of neuroticism. So it didn't give them a perfect score, but it looks a lot better than a New York Times article. One of the things which is surprising is the self-transcendence, which basically says that they show a lot of concern for the welfare and interest of others. And they have a lot of openness to change. And these are positive things. So, 5 minutes left, so I'm going to pick it up even more. So how do you increase the success rate of new hires? We took a look at the New York real estate brokers. There's a magazine called The Real Deal, or a website for brokers, which rates them, rates the different firms. We also were able to get data, which showed earnings and people's names for some brokers, which I can't mention, and then we did simple regressions against that. So let's see what we found out. Well, our model actually agreed with the Real Deal's ranking, with Douglas Elliman getting the highest score. And you can see that our low scores, the Real Deal rated as number 12 bond, we gave them a 10. We didn't do that badly. So we developed a profile for what would make, these are what the best brokers had in terms of their features, of their traits. They're very sympathetic. It's a very unusually high set of scores, actually. They have a lot of artistic interests, a lot of cooperation, self-discipline, so on. They also are very low on an anger score, which is good. It turns out that actually I didn't go into, but if we had to get the one variable which had the highest predictive value, it was a negative correlation to anger. Angry brokers just don't make it. So, the next is what I would call in the category of eye candy. With all these facets and all these people, it's at least interesting to look at if you make this into a graph and have nodes and edges with weights. And let's see what these things look like. So here's the obligatory bit of our code, and we'll go into it. So this was actually produced with Gephi. We produced the CSV with R and then threw it into Gephi. And this looks pretty, but you can't really tell that much about it other than it's cool. But R has, I'll go back, an interesting library called iGraph. And iGraph allows you to very easily take data and make it into an adjacency matrix and create these types of plots. In fact, just that first line there will do it for you. And then there's a whole set of very interesting things which are, I guess, sort of analogous to clustering techniques in data, which take these large networks and separate them out into subgroups. And this could be very interesting. You might ask a question like, what companies have a set of personality traits which are like other companies? And how does this relate to what sector they're in, and so on and so forth. So I'm sorry, let me go back to this one more time. So the code that does that is called Walk Trap, and there's a bunch of them. There's another one called Fast Greedy. If anyone's interested, I think you can just look at the iGraph documentation and find it, or contact me. It's a very cool package. So this is what we got. The first one that came out picked up all these banks, which is really interesting. They all have very similar personalities to each other. USB, Prudential, and so on. It's an insurance company. However, if you just want to look at agreeableness by itself, which is sort of a, why would you do that? But just makes a pretty graph. You see that it doesn't break down by industry. There's a lot of different agreeable companies that have equal amounts of agreeableness in the network. And finally, we wanted to see, well, what companies were like Apple? And the first one is openness and conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuropathy, and then those 5 put together for a match. And 43 seconds left, and thank you. And any questions, feel free to contact me.